The wedding glitch. Trust is a choice. Verification is a duty. That morning, Elias had whispered those words to his own reflection while watching blood bloom from a razor cut on his chin, his burner phone hidden behind designer cologne bottles, showing real-time tracking data on his bride-to-be. By sunset, he would be lying on a cabin floor with a man's shoe pressed against his throat, discovering that nothing, not his father's death 10 years ago, not the love he felt for the woman in white, not a single moment of his carefully constructed life, had ever been real. 13 hours earlier, his wedding day had begun like any other carefully controlled ritual. The bathroom was sterile. Gray marble, chrome fixtures, backlit circular mirror that cast Elias's face in a halo of false perfection. The water heater hummed. He stood before the mirror with thick, white shaving cream covering his jaw, the blade of a heavy silver safety razor catching the light. His eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept in 36 hours, but that was the point. Control required vigilance. Vigilance required wakefulness. He scraped the blade down his neck in one smooth stroke. The bristles fell away. His skin emerged pale and taut. The bathroom was silent except for the hum of the heater and the periodic drip of a leaky faucet from somewhere in the pipes. Tank, tank, tank. Like a clock counting down to something inevitable. His left hand moved to the counter behind the Bleu de Chanel and the Santal 33. There, hidden between the bottles, was the Nokia 105. Cheap plastic, disposable. The kind of phone that couldn't be traced. He pressed 1 for speed dial. The physical buttons clicked under his thumb with satisfying precision. No touchscreen, no cloud storage, no fingerprint recognition. Just buttons and a monochrome screen that glowed with the kind of information a man in love should never have access to. The text read, "Tracking active. Target at Warehouse 4. Elias stared at the words. His jaw tightened until the shaving cream cracked. Warehouse 4. Clara always told him she was having breakfast with her mother on Saturdays. Warehouse 4 was in the industrial district. No restaurants there, no mothers. Just empty concrete and the kind of space where people had conversations they didn't want recorded. He set the phone down and picked up the leather-bound notebook from under the sink. Moleskin. Expensive. The pages were covered in hand-drawn diagrams. Red ink, precise lines mapping the city blocks. Clara, written in the center with a circle and crosshair through it. Coffee shop on 5th Avenue. Tuesday at 2:14 p.m. Dentist office, Wednesday at 9:00 a.m. The gym, Thursday evening, always leaving at 7:47 p.m. Every movement documented, every pattern recorded. He had started this notebook 6 months ago, just before the gallery opening where they'd met by accident, or so she had said. He had believed it then. The accidental collision of two people reaching for the same painting. Her hand brushed his. Their eyes met. A smile. A conversation about light and shadow in contemporary art. The kind of moment that felt written by fate. But fate wasn't real. Chance wasn't real. After 3 months of dating, he had accessed her cloud storage. After 4 months, he'd installed the tracking app. After 5, he'd obtained her work schedule. By the time he'd proposed, on a beach at sunset, exactly the kind of romantic moment that photographs well, he knew more about Clara than anyone on earth. Except she didn't know that he knew. Elias wiped the remains of the shaving cream with a black silk towel. The water beaded on the marble and ran toward the drain. A small cut on his chin had opened from his tension. Blood. Just a droplet. But it hung there against his pale skin like an accusation. He stared at it. The crimson against white. That was the color of truth. The color of what was hidden beneath the surface. Trust is a choice, he whispered to the mirror, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. Verification is a duty. He picked up the bleeding spot with the towel. The stain would need cold water immediately, or it would set into the fabric. He knew these things. He knew everything about maintenance and control and the prevention of damage. What he didn't know was why a woman who claimed to love him would be at Warehouse 4 on a Saturday morning. The phone buzzed again. Subject moving, direction south. Elias pocketed the Nokia. He looked at his wedding ring on the counter. White gold, gleaming under the single light bulb like a promise. It matched the one on Clara's hand perfectly. They had picked them out together last month. She had cried when he proposed. Real tears, he'd thought. But tears could be rehearsed. He heard his mother's voice from years ago. The only person you can truly trust is yourself, Elias. Everyone else is performing. She had been right about so many things. She had been right about trust, about verification, about the necessity of surveillance. By the time she died, heart attack at 43, the doctor said, Elias had already understood the fundamental truth of human relationships. They were transactions, performances, strategic alliances between actors wearing different masks. He had worn masks too. The successful tech entrepreneur, the man who had inherited his father's company and doubled its value, the bachelor who finally fell in love. He was very good at masks, but the difference was that he had always known he was wearing them. Clara, apparently, believed in hers. He placed the wedding ring on his finger. It fit perfectly, exactly as promised. The clock on the wall showed 7 a.m. The wedding was at 2 p.m. He had 7 hours to understand what his bride-to-be was doing at Warehouse 4. 7 hours to verify that everything was exactly as it appeared. 7 hours to decide whether to walk down the aisle or walk away entirely. Elias finished dressing in the tuxedo that hung in the bedroom closet. Italian wool, hand-tailored, the kind of suit that moved like a second skin. He looked in the mirror. The mask was perfect. White shirt, black tie, hair combed exactly into place. If anyone looked at him, they would see a man in love, ready to marry the woman of his dreams. They would see the lie he wanted them to see. By 9 a.m., he was in the parking garage of the church, listening to the tracking app update in real time. Subject at Warehouse 4. No movement. 10 minutes elapsed. The GPS coordinates were precise. Latitude, longitude, the mathematical certainty of betrayal. He should have felt something then. Anger, sadness, betrayal. But what he felt instead was a strange calm. Because now it would be confirmed. Now there would be data to support the suspicion. And once the data existed, he could make a clean decision. Continue with the wedding or call it off, all based on facts rather than emotions. Facts were safe. Emotions were traps. He sat in the car with the engine running and the air conditioning on, watching the minutes tick by. The burner phone remained silent. The tracking app updated every 30 seconds. Subject still at Warehouse 4. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. At 10:15 a.m., he left the car and walked to the back of the church. He needed air. He needed to move. The oak doors were heavy and cool to the touch. The alley behind the church was damp with morning dew. The walls were brick, ancient and stained with watermarks. A green dumpster sat 20 feet away. The smell was of rust and old concrete, of secrets that had rotted in the sun too long. He stepped out into the gray morning light. The sky was overcast. In an hour, guests would start arriving. His mother was dead, so his father would sit in the front row and judge the match the way he judged everything, as a financial calculation. Clara's family would sit on the other side, all of them actors in some drama that Elias had not written, but somehow was forced to perform in anyway. A man stepped out from behind the dumpster, tan trench coat, dirty, disheveled. His face was gaunt, the face of someone who hadn't seen the inside of a shower in days. "She's not Clara, Elias," the man said. His voice was gravelly, like he'd swallowed broken glass. "Check the safe in her office. Code 0922. Elias moved without thinking. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. His hand shot out, grabbing the man by the lapels. The trench coat was rough fabric, smelling of gasoline and fear. Elias slammed him backward against the brick wall. The impact was solid. Dust fell from the mortar. "Who paid you to lie?" Elias's voice was low, controlled, dangerous, the voice of a man who had trained himself to contain violence. "Tell me, or I'll bury you under these stones." The man gasped. His eyes were wide. There was genuine terror in them. The kind that only comes when someone suddenly understands they have miscalculated. Elias increased the pressure on his lapels. The fabric creased. The man's face reddened. "I'm not lying," the stranger wheezed. "She's—" His hand moved to his pocket. Elias interpreted it as a weapon. He pulled back and drove his fist forward with all the force he could muster. The punch landed in the man's stomach, hard and precise. All the fear and doubt and rage of the past 6 months went into that blow. The man doubled over, making wet coughing sounds. Mucus and bile. The sound of a body in distress. "No," the man managed to say between coughs. Just look." But Elias wasn't listening anymore. He stepped back, breathing hard. The adrenaline was moving through his system now, making his hands shake. The man stumbled away, his feet splashing through puddles in the alley. He disappeared into the fog like a ghost that had never been real. On the wet asphalt where the man had stood was a flash drive. Blue plastic, scratched from use. A small blue LED blinked on it once, twice, then went dark as if powered by static electricity alone. Elias stared at it. The words from the man hung in the air. "She's not Clara." 3 possibilities. First, the man was delusional, sent by a rival to psychologically destabilize him before the wedding. Second, the man was telling the truth and Clara had been lying since the day they met. Third, something far more complicated was happening that Elias couldn't yet process. He picked up the drive. His knuckles were stained with blood and dirt. He wiped it on his expensive trousers. The drive was small, lightweight, the kind that could contain everything. Everything about Clara. Everything about the truth. Everything about the lie. His fingers moved through the files like someone in a trance, not quite believing what he was seeing. The first photo was him, 5 years ago, outside a courthouse. He was smiling at someone off camera. The photo was long lens work, professional, the kind of surveillance photograph that required planning and patience. But he hadn't known Clara 5 years ago. They had met at the gallery, exactly 1 year and 4 months ago. He scrolled. More photos. His apartment. His bank statements. A photo of his mother's grave, taken from directly above. The headstone crisp and clear in the frame. Each image was time-stamped. Each one predated their meeting by years. His life documented like a museum exhibit. His movements archived, his relationships cataloged. A video file, int01.mp4. He clicked it. The video opened. It was Clara, sitting in a dark room. Her face was illuminated by a monitor. She was wearing a headset. She looked directly at the camera with the flat, professional expression of someone giving a status report. "The subject is falling for the mask," Clara said, her voice calm and clinical. "Nothing like the soft, intimate voice she used when they lay in bed together at 3 a.m. Connection is 85% stable. Emotional dependency is increasing as predicted. He has begun to believe the relationship is real. Target engagement in 2 weeks, as planned. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the choir room was absolute. Elias stared at the black screen. His jaw was locked. The muscles in his neck had become cords of tension. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely close the laptop. When he did, he noticed his wedding ring was still gleaming on his finger. He looked at it like it was a foreign object, something that had no business being attached to his body. It was white gold. It matched Clara's perfectly. Except Clara had never been Clara. Clara was Sarah Vance. Clara was an agent. Clara was a project called Icarus, and Elias was Subject 1. He picked the ring up from the desk, where he'd placed it before plugging in the drive. The metal was warm from his hand. He could crush it if he wanted to, bend it, destroy it. But instead, he just held it and thought about how perfectly it had fit, how easily it had slipped onto his finger. The church bells began to ring. Not the wedding bells, not yet. Just the bells of the hour. 11 o'clock. 3 hours until the wedding. Elias stood up. He put the ring back on. He looked in the small mirror on the choir room wall. The mask was still in place. The groom was still ready. The performance would continue. But now he knew the truth about the stage he was standing on. He walked back toward the vestry. Clara was standing in her wedding gown when he found her. Pristine white lace that had probably cost more than most people's cars. A veil arranged perfectly around her face. A bridesmaid was dabbing perfume on her wrists. Small dabs of floral scent, lily of the valley, the smell of weddings and fresh beginnings and careful performances. "Leave us," Elias said to the bridesmaid. The bridesmaid looked at Clara. Clara nodded. The bridesmaid scurried out with the efficiency of someone trained to read subtle social cues. The door closed. Clara turned to face him. She was a work of art. She had probably been designed to be. The kind of woman that a man like Elias would find beautiful, intelligent, attentive, exactly calibrated to match his preferences. Because she had done her research. She had studied him. She had built him a mask and then worn it herself. "Explain Subject 1, Clara," Elias said, holding up the blue flash drive. His voice was low and dangerous, the voice of a man whose reality had just fractured. "Explain Project Icarus." Clara didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or deny or try to explain. She simply turned slowly, and the mask of bridal joy fell away like a curtain opening. Her face became flat, professional, the same face from the video. She reached into the folds of her dress, moving with the efficiency of someone trained in tactical operations, and withdrew a small black handgun. "You weren't supposed to see that for another month, Elias," Clara said, her voice now cold and clinical. "Sit down." But Elias didn't sit. Before he could respond, something changed in the air. The quality of light shifted. The window behind Clara suddenly developed a small, precise hole. The sound of the gunshot arrived a fraction of a second later. A red laser dot appeared on Clara's chest. Elias moved without thought, driven by something primitive and powerful. He tackled Clara, wrapping his body around hers and driving her to the ground, just as another bullet shattered the mirror behind them. Glass exploded into the air like a crystalline storm. The white carpet became a field of razor-sharp fragments, each one reflecting light like a tiny prism. Clara rolled, moving with the kind of fluidity that only comes from years of training. She raised her gun toward the window and fired twice. The shots echoed through the small room, deafening. Plaster dust fell from the ceiling. She was already on her feet, pulling Elias by his sleeve, moving toward the side exit with the efficiency of someone who had run this scenario 1,000 times. "They found us," Clara said, her voice now urgent and stripped of pretense. "My team is compromised. We move now, or we die in our wedding clothes." They were running. The white lace of her dress trailed behind her like a ghost. Elias had no choice but to follow. His mind was still processing the impossible, but the immediate reality was clear. Someone was shooting at them. Someone had found them. And the woman he had thought he loved was now the only person fighting to keep him alive. They hit the back stairs. Clara was ahead, moving down with one hand on the rail and the gun in the other. Her wedding dress was catching on the edges of the stairs. She pulled it free without slowing. Behind them, Elias could hear shouting. Footsteps, the sounds of organized pursuit. The parking garage was a maze of concrete and fluorescent lights. The SUV was black, an expensive model, the kind that was built for speed and durability. Clara had the keys somewhere. She pulled them from her gown and unlocked the vehicle. Elias dove into the passenger seat just as two men emerged from behind concrete pillars, their guns raised. "Get down!" Clara shouted. Elias threw himself across the console. Clara gunned the engine. The SUV lurched forward. The windshield exploded as bullets punched through the glass. Clara didn't flinch. She twisted the wheel hard and swerved around a low wall. One of the men fired. His weapon sparked. Clara spun the vehicle, putting another car between them and the gunman. The first shooter went down, clutching his leg. Clara had hit him with an impossible shot, fired from the driver's seat of a moving vehicle. The second gunman had positioned himself in their path. Elias grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall as the man lunged at him. They tumbled over the low concrete barrier together. Elias's mind was still trying to process Clara revealing the gun, the shooting, the revelation that she wasn't Clara at all. But his body was operating on pure survival instinct. He brought the fire extinguisher down hard on the man's helmet. The plastic visor cracked. The man's body went limp. Elias stared at what he'd done. The surreal horror of having struck another human being, of being responsible for his unconsciousness. But there was no time for shock. Clara was screaming his name. "Get in, now!" The SUV's engine roared. The sound was deep and primal, a V8 engine pushed to its limit. Elias ran and threw himself into the passenger seat. Clara didn't wait for the door to close. She floored the accelerator and they were moving, the tires shrieking as they gripped the concrete. Behind them, sirens were beginning to wail. Police? Federal agents? Elias didn't know anymore. The parking garage opened onto a rain-slicked street. The SUV hit the road at 60 miles per hour in a 40-mile zone. Clara's hands were steady on the wheel. Her jaw was locked. She looked like a different person, or perhaps like the person she had always been underneath the mask. "Talk," Elias said. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. Broken. Betrayed. "Not yet," Clara replied. She was weaving through traffic with the kind of skill that only came from extensive training. "First we live, then we talk." She pulled a thick, blood-stained envelope from under the seat. She handed it to Elias. He opened it with trembling fingers. A passport, but the photograph was Clara's face, and the name underneath read, Agent Sarah Vance. "Is anything real?" Elias asked. His voice cracked. "The cat? The apartment? The way you looked at me last night?" Sarah, Clara, whoever she was, didn't answer immediately. She was focused on the road, weaving through traffic with practiced precision, checking the mirrors for pursuit. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the roof of the SUV. The wipers swatted back and forth in a hypnotic rhythm. "Your father didn't die of a heart attack, Elias," she said finally. Her voice was matter-of-fact, stripped of emotion. "He was an asset, and he left you his debt." Elias looked at her. "My father is dead." "That's what you were supposed to believe." She reached into the glove compartment and withdrew a photograph. It was old, yellowed at the edges. It showed a man in his 50s, standing in front of a car. The man had Elias's face in miniature. His father. Alive, or at least alive at some point when this photograph was taken. "I don't understand," Elias said. But even as the words left his mouth, he did understand. He was beginning to understand. The surveillance, the tracking, the carefully constructed relationship. It had never been about love. It had been about something far larger. Something that involved his dead father, or at least his supposedly dead father. Sarah glanced at a timer on the dashboard. It was counting down. 15 minutes. Elias watched the seconds tick away. "What happens when that hits 0? He asked. Sarah reached into her arm and peeled back a piece of tape. Underneath was a small electronic device, barely larger than a grain of rice. A tracker. She ripped it out, leaving a thin line of blood on her skin. She brought it to her mouth and bit down to hold it, then lowered the window and threw it out into the rain. "That's when they blow the house," Sarah said, "and they think we're still in it." A black sedan rammed them from behind. The SUV fishtailed violently. The world spun. Elias's stomach lurched. His hands shot out for the dashboard. Sarah was fighting the wheel, her muscles straining as she tried to control the massive vehicle. The sound was apocalyptic. Metal on metal, the shriek of tires, the percussion of the collision. The SUV stabilized. Sarah jerked the wheel to the right. They careened across 2 lanes of traffic. A truck honked, swerving to avoid them. The sedan behind them was accelerating again, preparing for another impact. Sarah did something that seemed impossible. She took her foot off the accelerator, allowing the sedan to close the gap. Then, at the last possible second, she hit the brakes hard and veered left. The sedan shot past them, its driver unprepared for the maneuver. Sarah pulled the wheel hard to the right, the SUV's momentum carrying them into a side street. The sedan tried to follow but was blocked by oncoming traffic. Sarah didn't slow down. She was driving on pure instinct now, taking turns at random, using the urban landscape like a chess player using the board. 20 minutes later, they had left the city behind. The rain was lighter now. The road was empty. Sarah pulled the SUV onto a narrow path that led into the woods. The pavement turned to gravel, then to dirt. Low branches scraped the sides of the vehicle. She drove until the cabin appeared, a small structure that had probably been beautiful once, before decades of weather and neglect had gotten to it. The wood was gray and weathered. The windows were dark. It looked like a place where things ended rather than began. Sarah parked the SUV behind the cabin, out of sight of the main road. They sat in silence for a moment. The engine ticked as it cooled. The rain pattered on the roof. Elias could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. His entire life had been dismantled in the span of 3 hours. The woman he loved didn't exist. His father was possibly alive. He had struck another human being unconscious with a fire extinguisher. None of it felt real. "Come on," Sarah said. She opened the door and stepped out. Elias followed her to the cabin. She pushed the heavy door open. Inside, everything was covered with white sheets, like a house that was haunted by its own history. The furniture was old, wooden, the kind of piece that had been expensive once, but was now just aging. Dust particles floated through the thin light that entered through the grimy windows. "We need to figure out where to go next," Sarah said, limping slightly. Elias realized she'd been wounded at some point, though when, he couldn't say. "I need answers," Elias said. His voice was harder now. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by something colder. "Who are you? Why did you—" A floorboard creaked. A man stepped out from the shadows between the white sheets. He was wearing a perfectly pressed tuxedo. His shoes were polished, his tie was straight. He was carrying a silenced pistol with the casual ease of someone who had held one 1,000 times before. It was Julian, Elias's best man, the person he had known since college, the man who had stood beside him for a decade, the man who had helped him through his father's death, the man who had convinced him to try dating apps and social media and all the other ways that modern men found women. Julian was smiling. "You always were a fast learner, Sarah," Julian said. "But you should have kept the mask on Elias. It was safer for him." Elias looked at Sarah, then back at Julian, then down at Julian's hand. There was a ring on his ring finger, a white gold band, identical to the one on Elias's finger, identical to the one Clara had been wearing. "You were the one watching us," Elias said. The realization felt like falling into a well that had no bottom. "You were in on it from the start." Julian laughed. It was a sound that Elias had heard 1,000 times before, but it sounded different now. Cold, performative, like an actor who had finally stepped out of character. "That's right," Julian said. "I was the watcher. I was the handler. I was the man who made sure you didn't figure it out too early. And I have to say, for someone who's been surveilling his bride for 6 months, you're not as observant as I'd hoped." He tossed a document onto the table. A marriage certificate. Elias looked at it. He didn't want to, but some compulsive need to understand drove his eyes to the names. Clara Vance, Julian Cross, married 2 years ago. "Our marriage was the real job," Julian said, and his voice contained something that sounded almost like pride. "This wedding today, your wedding, that was just the retirement fund, the final operation before we disappear." Sarah tried to reach for her gun, but her arm was too weak. She collapsed to her knees, her face going gray. Elias ran toward her, but stopped when Julian raised the pistol. "Don't move," Julian said pleasantly. "Sarah doesn't need help. She needs to accept her new reality." Julian moved toward Elias, the gun held steady, pointed directly at Elias's head. "The veil is off," Julian said. "There's nothing left to see." Elias dove at Julian's legs. They crashed together into a bookshelf. The shelf toppled, sending dozens of hardcover books cascading to the ground. Dust exploded into the air. Elias had never fought anyone, had never trained, had only lived in his mind and through screens. But the body knew what to do when faced with death. It knew how to fight. Julian had the gun. That was the only thing that mattered. Elias grabbed for the wrist, twisting it upward. The gun fired. The suppressor made it into a muffled cough. But the sound was still loud enough to shatter a lamp hanging from the ceiling. The room went darker. Glass rained down on them. Elias used his forehead to drive into Julian's nose. He felt the cartilage give way. Blood sprayed across his shirt, hot and bitter. Julian screamed and staggered back, and the gun fell from his fingers and skidded across the floor. But Julian recovered. He grabbed a piece of broken wood from the shattered shelf and swung it like a club. The wood connected with Elias's temple. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He tasted blood. His vision went sideways. He fell onto a sheet-covered sofa. Through the haze of pain, he could see Julian looming over him. raising the wooden stake for a final blow. Elias's hand reached blindly into the sofa cushions. His fingers found what he was searching for. The blue flash drive. The thing that had started this entire catastrophe. He gripped it like a knife, and in that moment, something shifted in his mind. His mother's voice came back to him, from years ago, before she died. The only person you can truly trust is yourself, Elias. Everyone else is performing. She had been right. She had known this. She had prepared him for this. Elias jabbed the sharp USB end of the drive deep into Julian's ankle. Julian screamed and jumped back, releasing his grip on the wooden stake. Elias scrambled toward the burner laptop that sat on a desk in the corner. He plugged the drive in. The screen came to life. Files appeared, dozens of them. Video feeds, surveillance data, everything. But there was something else too. Something his mother had left. Layers beneath the layers. He typed his mother's maiden name. ELARA. The screen flashed green. Override granted. Protocol, Phoenix. Julian grabbed his ankle, hopping toward Elias with murder in his eyes. But it was too late. The laptop was already executing something deep in the code. On the screen, a secondary network appeared. Then a third. Then a fourth. Elias realized with sudden clarity that his mother, before she died, had built this. She had anticipated something like this. She had left him the keys to a kingdom he'd never known existed. The phone in Julian's hand started smoking. The screen cracked. Electronic sizzling filled the air. On the laptop, a new video feed opened, and Elias saw his father. Older, in a luxury office. Looking at his own monitors as lights began flashing red all around him. "Mom left me the keys to the kingdom, Dad," Elias said, his voice level and icy. "I just locked the doors." Sarah found the strength to stand. She had the pistol in her trembling hand. She fired once. The bullet took Julian in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down into the pile of furniture, his scream echoing through the cabin. Elias and Sarah stood 2 feet apart, covered in dirt and blood and something that looked like truth. They looked at the laptop screen, where Elias's father was being escorted away by men in black tactical gear, where armed figures were moving through an office, confiscating servers and files. The battery indicator on the laptop was blinking. 1%. The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute. A pier overlooked a gray ocean. The sun was setting, the sky bruised with purple and orange, the kind of light that only appeared at the end of the world. The wind was cold and carried the salt smell of the sea. Elias stood at the wooden railing, wearing a borrowed coat over his torn tuxedo shirt. The white fabric underneath was stained with blood that was no longer his. The horizon was a line between 2 infinities, sky and sea, neither one more real than the other. Clara, Sarah, walked up behind him. She was wearing jeans and a sweater now, and the wedding dress had been left behind in the cabin, presumably to be burned or buried or destroyed in whatever way made sense to people who disposed of evidence for a living. Her hair was down. Without the careful styling and the bridal makeup, she looked younger, or perhaps older. It was hard to tell anymore what anyone actually looked like when you couldn't trust the image in front of you. "I didn't do it for the money," Sarah said. She held out a small velvet box. "I did it because your father would have killed you years ago if I hadn't agreed to watch you." Elias didn't take the box. He didn't turn around. He kept looking at the horizon. "That doesn't make it better," he said. "No," Sarah agreed. "It doesn't. But it makes it true." Elias finally took the box. It was navy blue, pristine, the kind of box that belonged in a jewelry store. Inside, wrapped in white tissue paper, was a glass vial. Inside the vial was a lock of blonde hair, and next to it, a micro SD card. Another file? Elias asked. Another piece of data? Not data, Sarah said. A recording. Your mother made it before she died. She knew what was happening. She wanted you to hear her voice. Elias held the vial up to the sunset light. The hair was his mother's. He was certain of it. He could remember her brushing it, the way the blonde turned to silver when she was ill. Sarah reached out to touch his face. Her hand stopped an inch away, hovering in the space between them that seemed impossible to cross. The gap between truth and lies. The distance between the mask and the person underneath. What happens now? Sarah asked. Elias didn't answer. He looked at the micro SD card in the vial. All he had to do was play it,